All right. Hello and welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, special after debate edition. I'm your host, Brenton Lengel. For those of you who don't know me, I am a playwright, Ringo nominated comic author, and anarchist political commentator. And I'm joined by Ben Burgis, who needs no introduction, but just in case there's just a random person out there who clicked on this video and doesn't know who we are. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I guess I'll start with columnist for Jacobin because I've because that's always the thing that I've joked a few times in the last year that if I get hit by a truck, I want my tombstone to be as the Ben Burgis, 1980 to 2021, loving son, husband, was on the masthead at Jacobin.
That's great.
And then I'm a philosophy instructor at Perimeter College, and I am the host of a podcast and YouTube show called Give Them an Argument.
Mm-hmm. And that was actually kind of what we were doing as we were I don't know if we were giving them an argument, but we were giving an argument towards socialism and innovation on modern day debate last night.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a strange thing. So who suggested the topic originally? Do you remember?
That was Todd, actually. Yeah, I was surprised too.
Okay. So yeah, the topic was can socialism innovate? And of course, we were on team yes, and Todd and Keith were on team no. And I will say without descending too far into trash talking that I think that we pretty clearly explained yes, why yes, and it was one of these things where different people seem to be in slightly different debates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I was really surprised too, because I've had debates with Todd and Keith before, and they're both pretty sharp. Todd is one of the few people on the right that I can actually talk to and has good analysis. So I was actually a little worried coming into it, like, oh my God, what's he going to say?
Yeah.
I'm like, how's he going to come after socialism? And they sort of failed to come after socialism. Now, one of the mistake that I think Todd made is that he tried to tie his criticism of socialism to a criticism of the labor theory of value, which I've seen this criticism before. I've moderated, communist versus capitalist debate forums for years, ever since Occupy Wall Street ended. I've dealt with people coming in, and usually the first time someone comes into one of these forums to argue with communists, especially if they've been affected by the von Mises people, if they're a right libertarian, which Todd is not, though I know he found me through right libertarian circles, they will try to kind of oh, commies, I've disproved the labor theory of value. Subjective theory of value is superior. What are you going to do about it? And of course, that argument doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, if the announced topic had been is the labor theory of value, right, then I might have watched that debate, but I certainly wouldn't have participated in it since I am. I'm not an economist. I kind of know what some of the big arguments are on various, and it's not both sides of that; it's various sides of that, right? Because there are people who do try to, to rehabilitate the labor theory of value. There are different versions of that floating around, and there's a sort of simple, intuitive thing that I think most radicals mean by the labor theory of value, but that's not quite the same thing as the technical economic theory. It's just a sort of sense that labor creates all value, and this is linked to why we think capitalism is exploitative and bad. And I certainly agree with that, right? I think as far as is like like Andrew Kleinman has the temporal single system interpretation of labor theory of value, and Kevin Carson has something that's like a sort of like weird hodgepodge of the labor theory of value with like Austrian economic ideas, and like I think that's all interesting, but I mean I'm definitely a civilian there. And I mean I think when I have debated this, like, does capitalism exploit workers, I've just made the G.A. Cohen point, which I made in the debate, which is that that's a logically separable question for the labor theory of value. So so Cohen has this great paper. I mean, like the first couple sections of it are very technical economicsy, but like you can honestly just skip to a few sections in when he sort of gives the big philosophical argument that he's given, which is that as far as the idea that capitalism exploits workers, it really doesn't matter. Like it's not, like the labor theory of value is neither necessary nor sufficient, to think that. And he's got this nice analogy there, because if you're like a marginalist about value, if you think that, basically if you think that consumer desires are what produce value, well, that doesn't mean that you would think that therefore, because they're the creators of value, consumers just have a right to the stuff that they value. Nobody would think that, which helps us see Cohen's point, which is that one way or the other, workers create the products that have value, and so which is all you really need to say that they have a sort of default right to that value,
to the fruits of their labor, essentially, which is not their paycheck. It's literally the thing that they create.
Literally the thing that they create, which is then sold, and then part of that is their paycheck. But then, like, the question is about the other part, and the sort of traditional socialist metaphor has been to like feudalism, where the peasant spends a certain amount of time growing the crops, for their own consumption, and then a certain amount of time growing crops for the consumption of the lord and his family, and retainers and everything, and so if anything, if you don't bring the labor theory of value into it at all, right, like that just strengthens that analogy, because like literally we're talking about the stuff that they make. And of course the defender of capitalism would say that they don't have a right to that because they freely contracted it away, by signing a capitalist, employment contract. Yeah. And then that's where you're going to have the real argument, about, okay, is that really, how free is that contract, all that.
Which is in the debate kind of where I tried to jump into it and be like, a capitalist contract is never circumstances surrounding
equal bargaining power.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, because you have, right. I mean, the point you were making today was that workers and capitalists have wildly uneven bargaining power. So, like, of course, under those circumstances, you're going to agree to that, but that's not, meaningful.
Okay, great. Yeah, you'd locked up for a second there. So, all right. Now, before we get on, because I do want to talk about your opening, because I thought your opening was absolutely excellent. And I thought it was probably the best opening of all of us. I felt a little bit like a scrub, and I'm known for my openings at MDD, so well done. But I'm glad you did not feel that way. So maybe I was.
I definitely did not. I thought that was very strong, but yeah, and this is something that felt a little weird, because I was like trying to anticipate all the reasons they could say that socialism can't innovate, and then we got all this stuff about the labor theory of value, and then we sort of got Keith's thoughts about various subjects, but yeah, so like in the opening, what I was trying to do is just say, look, if you want to have a historical argument about innovation in Soviet model countries, like, I'm not your man. Because that's not the model of post-capitalist society that I'm advocating, and if the claim is just that there are certain forms of socialism, that might be bad for innovation, I have no problem granting that. I also think that it doesn't take that much imagination to see how you could have a range of capitalist societies that are set up in ways that might be better or worse, for innovation. But here's what I mean, at least by socialism. Here's what I'm advocating, which would be that you would no longer, I talked a little bit about a more sort of distant horizon, right? The sort of communist horizon of like what we would hope like a really advanced socialist society might eventually look like, right? But then, of course, it's and then I tried to give some reasons, and this kind of echoed what you were saying in your opening statement. I tried to give some reasons to think that in a society like that, there would be lots of innovation, right? And this is the point you hit really strong in your opening statement, which is the Stephen Jay Gould point, right? That there are lots of people who could contribute to technological and other sorts of innovations in lots of ways who aren't going to do that because they're going to spend their entire lives working all day in fields or, Amazon warehouses. And all that human potential, would be freed up in such a society. So I think that it's speculative, it's a priori, but I think this does give us some reason to think there'd be lots of technological innovation in that extremely optimistic future vision, that kind of fully automated luxury communism. But then the other half was, okay, we're speculating about a society that's very different from the one we live in, and it's hard to make certain projections one way or the other. So let's talk about the kind of socialism we could have next week, right? Like,
yeah,
if we had a revolution in the next week, right? Obviously, but if we did, right?
Yeah. Well, because again, there's been a lot of criticism that socialists aren't good at articulating our ideas, or we never do. We only criticize capitalism. So it was really nice to you were a great partner for that as well, both in the theoretical and what we're going to see. Now, I did want to jump back to LTV really quickly, and the Marginalists, because this is something that I was lucky enough to, that the guy who eventually convinced me to actually become an anarchist and a socialist, one of them, arguments with this guy in online forums many, many years ago, well before Web 2.0. He wound up growing up to become a professional economist, like employed by a major economic firm. And so I kind of he's like my ringer. And whenever I want to understand something in economics, I go talk to him. And then I come in and it seems like I really know what I'm talking about. But one of the things that I've noticed, and this is especially true on the far right, and especially with like the ANCAP libertarians, they will posture as though they really understand economics. And they'll be, commies don't understand economics. And one of the things that I would always bring up, because, by the way, to everybody listening, if you want to know whether the person that is claiming to understand economics understands economics, here's what you ask them. You ask them, what is marginal utility?
Yeah.
and this is what, because one, the online explanations of it are almost incomprehensible. And it's a really simple concept if you actually know it and have actually studied econ. So what I would say is, with marginal utility and why they thought of it as disproving LTV, you think of it like this. Marginal utility is just the difference in utility or value between one unit of something and another unit of the exact same thing. So they'll talk about water and diamonds, but the way my buddy explained it to me, we said pizza. Okay. You have one slice of pizza. Great. I'm super hungry. You have 2 slices of pizza. All right. This is great. Let's keep this going. You have 3 slices of pizza. Okay. Getting a little full. 6 slices of pizza. Oh my God. Why am I doing this to myself? And so what the marginalist revolution, that whole thing was about in disproving labor theory of value, supposedly, is that they found that the utility of the exact same product altered depending upon how many units of it you had, and thus the value seems to be more located in the person and the circumstances surrounding that person, as opposed to in the object itself. And that doesn't, in my opinion, disprove labor theory of value, but it is a fun thing to hit people at when they want to flex like they know economics, and they do not know economics.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, I think that, and look, I mean, there's also, I mean, economics like legitimately is, incredibly complicated. It's a field where you have a bunch of different, competing theoretical frameworks that you don't. It's not prone to the same kind of like consensus around frameworks that you get in other empirical fields. It's both mathematically complicated, and empirical results often undermine what any given model says should happen, and all of which is just to say that, like, I think it should be approached with a little bit of humility. And I think that look, all both sides this, I think that like some people on the left will sort of read 3 articles about MMT and convince themselves that like they've got all the answers to all this stuff, and that anybody who contradicts them just well, bro, you just really need to like study this like I have. But then conversely, like libertarians and conservatives just like are all like that.
Well, it's also, so economics, especially in the United States, culturally has a very, like, as far as like academic disciplines and scientific, economists tend to fall a little more on the right. And this is kind of due to 2 reasons. One, the Koch brothers threw a huge amount of money at academia, created a whole, like a good example is George Mason University, where their economics department is like part and parcel owned by the Koch brothers and essentially functions as a propaganda factory. Now, I'm not saying that they don't also do other kinds of research, but like I'm always very skeptical whenever I get something from GMU, just because I know about like that their reputation for pumping out a very specific kind of economist. But also, like, I know a friend of mine, when they were applying for economics school at a major state university, one of the questions they were asked, like on their applications as graduate school, was like, are you now or have you ever been a member of a socialist party?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think a lot of it is just the long-term effect of McCarthyism, that they just did a really good job of like purging those departments, which, because like this is, I mean, if you read, like, I try to subject myself to, like, just to keep myself honest, to like at least 1 or 2 conservative books a year. And so one of the ones I did last year, the year before, was William F. Buckley, God and Man at Yale, and like half of that book is him complaining about like the left-wing economists who taught at Yale. And I was like, wonder how long those people, his careers lasted, and like because it seemed like, if I don't know, like I know that's a claim like I've heard Richard Wolff make several times, that there was a lot of these departments were like pretty efficiently purged of leftists back when. And however much truth there is to that narrative, I mean, it's certainly the case, I think, undeniably, that contemporary academic economics, is very very tilted, to the right, and that and realistically, like, there are fields where I think it would be easier or harder to to sort of keep people out, based, ideologically. But, I think that would be one where it'd be pretty easy.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, I remember so I was working in fundraising at Baruch College in New York, which is a major financial school. And there was a professor that I just happened to work in the same area of the building that I did. And I found out he was an economics professor. And this was when I was really active with Occupy Wall Street. And a friend of mine had brought up this like point about Marx. And essentially, like, it was Marx had made some comment like along the lines of all the prices within a system are related to each other. So the price of silver rises, the price of silk falls within relation to that. And I remember I went up to this particular professor, and again, I don't want to knock academia too much, and I could have just gotten a a specific kind of guy. But I asked him, I was like, hey, so I read this thing about Marx, and I'm just wondering, is there any empirical evidence to back up this claim? That's all I wanted to know. And the guy kind of looked at me for a minute and blinked and told me to read Milton Friedman. And I'm just like, okay, that's not what I asked.
All right. Yeah, and by the way, I see you've got
the super chat. Let's bring that up here.
So Wolf has been a guest before. He will most certainly be back. And yeah, those would be fun things to get into. So probably at least some of that stuff whenever he's back would be the answer.
Yeah, I'm supposed to get Wolf on my channel at some point. I was going to have him and Friedman both after I moderated their debate, but I got really busy with publishing stuff, and then I waited so long that I felt weird asking about it. So I'll probably bug him later. But yeah, thank you for the question there. So Ben. One of the things that I thought was really effective about your opening statement was that you ended it with, and usually I don't think it's a good idea within opening statements to assume arguments, but the thing that you ended it with, where you said you're going, I can't remember the exact words here, but you essentially were like, if you're going to argue this, you then have to defend.
Yeah. So my claim was just this, talking about the kind of socialism we could have, a week after the revolution or whatever, right? Think, okay, well, look, we have examples of, Western democracies, successfully running, some nationalized industries. You can look at like coal or healthcare in the UK in, late 20th century. And we have examples of successful worker co-ops, so like if you just want like the sort of closest to what exists, now sort of most easily imaginable form of, early stage socialism, it would just be that those would be the kinds of things that you would have more or less, right? And we could get finicky about the details, I think like the sort of more worked out models of this, like David Schweikart has a book called After Capitalism, where he talks about this. You might have the sort of like worker co-ops, but essentially renting the physical means of production from the public sector. There are reasons that you might want that, but like without getting into all the finicky details, like, hey, we have Mondragon, we have the NHS. It's easy to imagine a society where instead of like you didn't have like a capitalist private sector, but you had like a worker co-op sector and a state sector, and that was the economy. And then the point is just, well, look, we have tons of examples of technological innovation going on in the state sector, in the United States. I mean, that's like very easy to populate examples of that, if you want to. The internet, GPS, radar, stuff like that. And
I think, by the way, with regard to like innovation, this is something that, and it was very interesting that Todd, one of the ways he went after it was art. And I have seen this opinion on the right. I have a friend and collaborator who's brilliant. And they happen to be a bit on the right, and they will say stuff like, artists who support left-wing ideas are, essentially cutting their own throats because, you'll get paid by the government in a socialist, and they're always imagining some sort of Stalinist state, but they won't allow you to create freely. Instead, you'll have to create propaganda for the government. And Todd kind of touched on that a little bit, though he didn't really go that direction. He went more like a kind of populism where we're having to create and represent everybody.
Yeah. So, right. So, I mean, I was assuming, and I think you kind of were too, that like in our openings that really what we were talking about was like technological innovation, right? So like my point is just like tons of state sector technological innovation in the real world, lots of technological innovation going on at Mondragon, So these are the sectors that I think would exist in this kind of early stage socialism. The real world versions of them, Innovate plenty, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to say that in this society that I'm describing, there wouldn't be lots of technological innovation, then you have to explain why, like, just having those be the only sectors of the economy would mean that. It's not obvious, right? And in your opening statement, you went a lot into the sort of history of innovation in different kinds of societies that have existed. And I've got to say, like, I really don't think either of those arguments were ever really answered. Like I'm not saying like, oh, I found the answers unsatisfactory. Like, I literally don't think either of those arguments were answered at any point in the debate. But then, yeah, he wanted to make this thing about artistic innovation. And so I think he was doing two things there. Like, one of them was the labor theory of value thing. And I guess the chain of thought there goes, socialists believe in the labor theory of value, which, by the way, already is a huge oversimplification.
Yeah.
Plenty of socialists don't believe in labor theory of value, but whatever. And plenty aren't sure, or whatever, but there have been like lots of even like heterodox Marxists who've rejected labor theory of value, but whatever, doesn't matter. Socialists believe in the labor theory of value. And he also seemed to be assuming that socialists believe that everybody should be compensated according to like terms that make sense within the labor theory of value. So like average social necessary labor time, which is also a weird leap because just labor theory of value, true or false, that's a descriptive question. How should we compensate people to social society? That's a normative question. And you could say yes to the first question and answer the second question literally any way, right?
Yeah.
Like, those are, that's just a further question. But then like making both of those assumptions, then one of his arguments was, well, you're not going to be able to appropriately compensate artists and other innovators because the way, whatever, I guess the idea is like art, like artistic genius isn't, and technological genius maybe involve like sudden eureka moments and blah, blah, blah. And we're not going to be able to capture this in terms of average hours of socially necessary labor time.
Yeah. Which, by the way, in a weird way seems a very capitalistic way to think about socialists, even if we're using like market socialism and we're still using money. Like most socialists seem to agree that society should in some way provide for everyone within the society, regardless of what that person's output is towards the society. The communists might be a bit more hardcore on that than like a market socialist. But I would say most socialists would say that, you should have the basics of life taken care of for you by society.
No, I mean, I think just about it'd be a very strange socialist who didn't say that, right? I mean, I guess it's like logically possible that you could have that combination of positions, but realistically, yeah, every socialist is going to say that. And in fact, like that thing I kept like referring back to when I was kind of nitpicking Todd's stuff is the critique of the Gotha program where Marx, among many other things that are very different from, I think, what Todd was suggesting, says, of course, you need to have, you couldn't just pay people the full value of their labor because you need to have deductions to pay for new industrial development, fix old machines, and also common needs like schools and hospitals, and one of Marx's examples there is is to provide a living for people who can't work, and so anyway, I agree. There's something very funny about that. So, but I mean, I'd also just say, okay, fair enough. Probably, I mean, I don't know. I mean, actually, like, it's kind of funny because I don't think a lot of socialists actually do advocate the system of compensation that he's imagining. And I certainly don't. But also, even if we did, I don't know how bad that would be. Like, if you just sort of had to have like
a certain amount of socially,
like as a writer or an artist or whatever, you just log your hours and that's how you're like that. I don't know that,
Yeah.
Or
like
honestly, it would probably be good for me because I'd have more regular and consistent work habits.
I would agree with you 100% on that. It's like it's been very interesting, at least for me, with regard to lockdown with COVID, because it's given me a lot of time to work that I otherwise might not have had because I'd be running around doing this and that. One of the things that one of the reasons why I was like, wow, this is such a slam dunk is as an artist, and granted, art is a little different than other fields. I've even said in my own plays that art is not a job, it's a calling. It's a compulsion. Because coal mining, we'll say. If there is no coal to mine, a coal miner is not going to set up a tiny mine somewhere by himself and invite his friends and family to come and watch him, pull coal out of the ground.
No, for sure. But of course also and this kind of ties into his other point, right? Which is that, which is not so much like it would be bad for artists in terms of like figuring out how to pay them. Would again, just neurotically, I gotta say, the Soviet Union did not do that, right? Like they did, that's not how pay scales worked in Soviet state enterprises. That they were trying to calculate average socially necessary labor time or anything like that.
Yeah, the anarchists didn't do anything like that either.
Yeah, the anarchists in Spain in the Civil War, certainly weren't doing that. There's nobody in the Paris Commune was doing that, and more importantly, none of the sort of models of I guess maybe okay, there is one guy I could think of. I'm losing his name, but there's a Cockshot, Paul Cockshot, I guess is kind of like that, right? But other than Cockshot, none of the sort of theoretical models of feasible socialism that are out there, do that. So I don't really understand who this argument's directed against, but that's supposed to be it can't arrange for compensating artists properly, which I guess is supposed to be indirectly maybe an argument that there'd be less artistic innovation because people would have less economic incentive. Although that also seems really weird because,
we already have a huge economic disincentive to. We keep
doing capitalism. The incentives do not favor becoming an artist, right? Famously.
Oh Lord,
and then the other his other argument wasn't so much a argument about paying artists; it was an argument about that we would have bad art because the idea is, and I guess in a weird way, you were talking about people who make this, you're cutting your own throat because you're going to be forced to do state propaganda thing, which sort of imagines that we're talking about a Stalinist society, and in a way, I guess you have to give Todd credit here because he's not imagining a Stalinist society. He's taken seriously the democratic part of democratic socialism, but it's still weird because I think he's assuming that a society with economic democracy, that it would have to be the Occupy Wall Street General Assembly voting a la carte on each art grant.
Yeah.
And I just don't know why it would have to work like that.
What's funny about that is, and that may have been a fault of conversations he's had with me previously, because we've talked on and off. There's a lot of great debates that we've actually had that are backed up on my channel, where we talk about anarcho-communism and really get into the nitty-gritty. So he may have overemphasized that one particular approach, but also people don't tend to really understand consensus process until you've really taken part in it and you've seen what it can do. Because there's I will always point this out about Occupy when people criticize the GA. They'll say all you did at the GA was argue about money and take forever to make a decision. And I was I've been involved in a number of organizations that used Robert's Rules of Order, and all they did was argue about money. And take forever to make a decision.
Yeah. I mean, look, I do take let's say this, right? Like, cards at the table. I find all the like jazz hands consensus stuff annoying, and I think like, and I actually do take seriously in thinking about models of how socialism could work. The complaint that like most people don't like being at meetings, and you know, fair enough, right? But
Most people don't like being at meetings.
yeah, most people do not like that whatsoever, right? So, which is one of the reasons I'm relatively comfortable with, you know, representative forms of democracy, and but that also like it just seems like there are like really two obvious things you can say about this point about like, you know, oh, you'd have to like cater too much to the majority, you know, to, well, three, because one of them you said, which is that when you look at like actual like participatory budgeting procedures, you don't have to get an outright majority for every single request. That's not really how it works. You know, like in every budget line and every, you know, piece of it, right? You know, but then like also concretely, look, I mean, in the society that we actually live in, state-supported art does not have to cater to majority taste. Like, very notoriously, conservatives have been complaining about this for decades, that, you know, like the, you know, that like the NEA, you know, is funding this like perverse cosmopolitan stuff that real Americans don't like.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know why, like if state funding was a bigger piece of it within a democratic society, I don't know why that wouldn't hold true, that you'd still have, you know, like in general, and I guess this, I guess this is both the second and the third thing, that like in general, to the extent that you're worried about people having to cater too much to popular taste in their art, what you'd want to do, okay, sure, you wouldn't want to subject every artistic funding proposal to like some massive like mass meeting majority vote. But then again, I don't know why you'd have to do it that way in a socialist society. But like, to the extent that you're worried about artists having to like, you know, pander to popular tastes, other than that, like what you want to do is find ways to delink the income of artists from the market. Yeah. So like, you know, one way to do that is with like, is the sort of NEA solution, right? Or like you mentioned a few real historical examples in your talk, the WPA examples for the New Deal, or even like the sort of weird Cold War examples or whatever. Like, so I think oftentimes state funding has had this effect. It's delinked artists' income from the market. And the other thing that would delink artists' income from the market is just not like is just not having that be, not making artists make a living from selling art, which you could have just by creating a society where everybody had a lot more free time. You know, that like I mean, I think that you could have like, honestly, like there was I remember one of the questions in the Q&A at the end of the debate was this thing about, oh, but you know, you guys say that, you know, that once people are freed up from you know, their basic needs are met, you know, then like, you know, the untapped potential would come out. But what about people on welfare, you know, who aren't really doing anything, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, first of all,
yeah,
you know, the image of welfare in these people's heads is like, wasn't even true in 1990. It's certainly not true now. You know, like even before welfare reform, lots of people who are on aid to families with dependent children, you know, also had to work under the table and all this stuff because it wasn't really enough to live on. But like,
because it's purposefully not enough to live on. I mean, mainly the purpose that welfare tends to serve is just prevent the poor from going to war with the rich.
yeah. Just enough to stop that from happening. Exactly like the Roman bread rations. But
I feel like conservatives, by the way, they don't seem to understand this. I feel like they think that the government is like very touchy-feely and just really wants to help and is out doing all of these things for the workers because, oh, we just love you guys so much. And then like you look at the labor history and what side the state has been on. These are the tiniest concessions extracted by blood.
Right.
I mean, read about the Battle of Blair Mountain where they freaking
totally.
bombed miners.
Or Thomas Piketty's new book, that which I think really corrects like a lot of people in the United States have convinced themselves that like Sweden has an extensive welfare state because it just sort of like emerged from homogeneity in Swedish culture, like Athena popping out of the head of Zeus. As like, no, I mean, Sweden has a really extensive welfare state because of like a history of like really ferocious class struggle leading up to, the Social Democrats, taking power. Like that was like a just brutal country at one point. But yeah, like, so the welfare stuff is ridiculous, but also, again, since under capitalism, the incentives do not line up for people to be artists. Like, I think that like, if we're really really worried specifically about art, about people, writing novels and, and painting paintings and all that stuff, anybody who has those inclinations, goddamn will do those on welfare. Like, like if they are, certainly at least if by welfare we mean enough to actually live on, like and there are some very famous examples, right? I mean, she's not my favorite person politically, but J.K. Rowling famously, started writing, her novels, while she was literally on the dole, in the UK. Like, I'm not like, given the time is freed up, like anybody who would be a novelist or would be, a painter or whatever is going to do those things if you give them like some free time and a place to work in. Because if not, like they wouldn't do them, period. Because if they were like primarily dictated by economic incentives, you just wouldn't do that stuff.
No, definitely not. I mean, like literally one of the greatest probably one of the reasons why I dislike capitalism as much as I do is that one of the greatest frustrations of my life is, I was put on this earth to write and to create stories and stuff. And constantly I am having to deal with the society around me disincentivizing that behavior and forcing me back into, the workforce and stuff. And suddenly I'm working for some jackass that I don't even really, that I don't believe in, and it was something that I learned very early in my career too, because my second job out of college, I was actually employed as a full-time artist, just 100% full-time. I was working insane and quite frankly, illegal hours, 60 hours a week. And nobody was really, reporting this because we all just really wanted to be full-time artists. But after that job kind of came to an end, I remember and getting screwed over as badly as I did, because things would happen. Like my parents would send me care packages and I wouldn't get the care packages because I was knocked out asleep or at work whenever the postman would come. And so I kind of realized after that period of like a year of being employed by that particular company, like I would rather work a normal job and do work that I care about on the side, like create my art, than, be a full-time artist, but kind of get behind a vision that I didn't really believe in. And I've kind of lived by that ever since, all throughout New York. But the fact of the matter is that it's taken an incredible amount of will and risk and, just having to, and sacrifices just to continue to do my art in a society that wants me to do anything but my art, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, yeah, I saw Oliver pointed out, in the chat, Cormac McCarthy, who I'm just reading from Wikipedia here. After marrying fellow student Lee Holman in 1961, McCarthy moved to a shack with no heat and running water in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains outside Knoxville, etc. while caring for the baby and tending for chores at the house, Cormac asked Lee to get a day job so he could focus on writing his novel. Dismayed with the situation, she moved to Wyoming, where she filed for divorce. Yeah,
don't blame her. I don't blame her at all.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But but yeah, I mean, I think that I think that if you're like, I mean, look, concretely, like, certainly, at least if you buy the traditional socialist argument that automation would play out differently, given that the machines are collectively owned, that workers could just vote themselves fewer hours, with no decline in the standard of living. So if we got to, if we were a socialist society, look, we could just not pay artists at all. But if we were down to like a 4-hour workday, a hell of a lot more art would be produced than it is right now.
Yeah. Oh, and it would be incredible stuff too, because once you decouple art, and we've had a couple of comments like this in the chat. I haven't been directly responding to them because I wanted to, get through this and stay focused. But the fact is that art in a capitalist society is forced to become a commodity. And again, that's not how artists even function. Like, our goal is to touch as many people with our art as possible, to speak to as large an audience as we can, and to share something, I guess, true with them, to build that connection. And, throughout history, this has led to artists having a bunch of different roles in society. Like in medieval society, you would have to find a patron. You'd have to find a wealthy person who was just going to bankroll you, or you wouldn't be able to do this stuff. In current capitalist society, you've either got to find a patron, or you have to have a decent amount of crowdfunding, which thank God for that. Or, you have to get some NEA money, but that's almost impossible to get a hold of, and a lot of it's been, torn down since then. And also, this is something that a lot of people don't understand about fine art in particular. A lot of it is a way for rich people to scam each other, because, like, especially the world of like painting. Because usually what will happen is that like incredibly wealthy families will find an artist or painter that they like, or maybe it's their cousin or something, and they put all of this money behind them and debut this person to all of their friends. And basically people will be buying this guy's art as investments because they're being set up to take off among a certain class of people. I've said this a number of times, because a lot of times my day job has been funding the arts in the United States, and I tend to say that in other countries like Canada and like Norway and a lot of Europe, they value art, they support art. In American society, we don't so much support the arts as actively hate them and try to destroy them at every opportunity, or commercialize them. We love it when they make money for capitalists, but anything else, toss it out. Yeah, right. So what I would say here, this is an interesting comment I saw in the chat from B in the Hive. It's what I call "give a starving person a crumb syndrome." Give a starving person a crumb and they're much happier than a person who has a meal. They keep us poor for several reasons. This is one. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think that that it is often the case, like some leftists, are way too quick to assume that immiseration radicalizes people, and often I think historically exactly the opposite has been true. Certainly if you look at like times that regimes have started to like break up and crumble, it's often been when the screws have loosened a little bit, and I think that oftentimes when people like we talked about Sweden earlier, I think like Sweden in the 70s was a period of like incredible labor radicalism, because they had this like super built up welfare state, and like people, workers like had enough that they were like very confident, to ask for more. And Whereas I think oftentimes, like when in conditions like we have in the contemporary United States, people are just like too beaten down to question it. And so I don't, is that the reason why you have a lot of the like harsh, economic policies you have, the lack of a safety net and all that? I don't know. I mean, if what people like, I think it depends whether it's the reason means that there's some like cabal of people in top hats, like
The Monopoly man.
yeah, like sitting in a smoke-filled room somewhere deciding what the plan is, then no. If it's the reason means that like there's no particular incentive to change it, then yeah, for sure. And I even do think that there are some like elements of the political class and whatever who are like relatively self-conscious about that. I mean, like you could probably find like Cato Institute policy papers or something where, they'll pretty up the language, but they'll sort of say,
we got to keep the poor busy or they'll get ideas.
yeah.
Well, it's funny, and we're coming down to the wire here because I think we were only going to go for an hour, and unfortunately we had a slightly late start, so I don't want to keep you too long. But there were a couple of things that I did want to touch on. And this art discussion is fascinating, so we should definitely, continue it. But this goes back to, I think, to Todd's criticism. And I've noticed this a lot of the times among people on the right when they criticize socialism. They will oftentimes imagine features of capitalism as not being a feature of capitalism, but just how things are. And it's a very easy thing it's an easy mistake to make. The big one that I usually see is from ANCAPs when they say to themselves that like private security will be better than the cops because the cops suck. And you even brought this up in the debate that the only thing worse than a public police officer is a private police officer.
Yeah, right. Totally.
But it's like they kind of think that certain aspects of capitalism that aren't very obvious become like background radiation. And therefore, when they assume a socialist or a stateless society, what we see is they assume that the capitalist background radiation is still there. Hence, Todd's talk about how we need to appeal to a super wide audience and dumb down our art for the masses, which is the exact thing that capitalism makes actual successful artists do.
Yeah, and it's also like the police example is really strange, like in multiple ways, right? So yes, first of all, like if you have anybody fulfilling this function of going around like carrying guns and lording it over people and arresting them and all that, like for sure, the one thing worse than having a public employee doing that is having a private employee doing it, because they're going to be like, especially like, I mean, really with security more than almost anything else, because it's not like everybody's going to be buying their own individual cop, there is a small portion of the population that are going to be signing these paychecks, and they'll only incentives to cater to them. But it's also like, okay, look, I mean, whatever you think ultimately about, policing and how, whether, it makes sense to think that the police could be abolished outright, or we need some like, or we'll still need some, much less violent and authoritarian trimmed down version of it or whatever. Like, okay, whatever you think about the police, like just say like, hey, there's this thing that exists right now and it's public and it's bad. So like making things be publicly owned is bad. If, like, if we had like a Soylent Green factory that like, turned people into meat, like the cannibalism factory, like, yeah, I mean, a worker-owned cannibalism factory would be an evil institution, but I don't know what that's supposed to say about worker ownership.
I would agree with you on that. By the way, there was something I wanted to bring up. And so have you seen The Take by Naomi Klein?
No.
I would highly recommend you check it out, actually. It's one of this was like a seminal documentary for me. It came out while I was still in my pro-capitalist phase, and it was one of the things that I watched that sort of moved me into becoming an anti-capitalist. But what it deals with is the recovered factories movement in Argentina, which I don't know. I haven't heard from that in a while, so everything may have gone down the tubes. But I'd be I would be really interested in getting your take on that film, and especially because you mentioned Mondragon, and I was like, and the recovered factories movement in my head, and then yeah. Fun fact also about that: Occupy Wall Street was named after that because they were occupied factories, and then people at Occupy got mad because they thought Occupy was called Occupy because of, like occupied, Gaza or something.
Yeah, that always seemed really weird to me because it just seems so obvious that, like, yeah, I mean, one usage of Occupy, of the word occupy, is like colonize, but there's this like extremely long-standing alternate usage, like like in the 60s they talk about occupying buildings at Columbia or whatever, like that. I don't like that just seemed like that, like that's like almost on the level of like you mean like bass, like the guitar, and people think you mean bass like the bass, like the fish, like that's just such a weird thing to be
yeah. And it's hard to tell if the people making the criticism are genuine or if they're just messing with you when they do that. It's really weird. At some point, we should shoot the shit about Occupy, because that would be really fun. Because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about the movement when we were active and stuff. So we're coming right down to the end here. There's a couple things I want to answer in the chat, and maybe you can help me out with this. So this one is, Brenton, would love to hear your take on the whole ETF art deal, or NTF is what they meant. Are you familiar with this, Ben? Because
what is this?
I looked something up here. I found an article. Grimes is the latest artist to get in on the NFT gold rush, selling around 6 million worth of digital artwork. So it looks like it's got something to do with like Bitcoin or something. But I have no idea what it is. So I don't know what NFTs are. Sorry, I'm a bit too much of a older millennial to know what that is about. Non-fungible token. Okay, so it's like cryptocurrency. I don't know. There's a play that I wrote called Anarcho, about 5 anarchists trying to run a pizza shop in like post-revolutionary Brooklyn. And one of the jokes that always got the biggest laugh out of the audience was like, come on, Randy, the dollars is worthless as a useless monopoly money you're playing with on the internet. And it's called Bitcoin. Yeah. So I'm
pretty I mean, I think that cryptocurrency is not something I get excited about. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I'd love to have a Bitcoin at the moment because, what I could sell it for. So I do feel a bit like a jackass, but also like, I think Bitcoin mining is using up more electricity than small countries. And that's terrifying. Like, especially like in the world of
I know, like the energy output, like it's just like every time I hear about that just sounds like such a bizarre dystopian detail to really be true.
Yeah. So on that thing, I apologize for not understanding what this is. I will do my best to figure it out, and hopefully the next time I stream, you can ask me, and I'll have some sort of take on that. Now, I think there's one or two others that I wanted to pull up, but Ben, before we go, do you want to plug your pluggables real quick?
Yeah, sure. So the podcast, the YouTube channel is called Give Them an Argument, and you can find my stuff at Jacobin. There's a very rapidly forthcoming book, which is this one that I'm holding up, which you can pre-order from lots of places. So if you don't want to support Jeff Bezos' sweatshop. There is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore that you can order books from online called Red Emma's. That's redemmas.org. Can get this, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. And I guess I'll throw in one non-standard pluggable because it just came up. There is this April and May. I am teaching a class. Michael Albert does this thing. It's the School of Social and Cultural Change, which it's a place that offers online online courses for the masses. So they probably, like, there's a sliding scale, but the high end of the sliding scale is probably like 1% of like tuition for like a 3-credit class at a university. And there's like 12 or 13 classes on there. One of them's taught by Noam Chomsky, but the one that I'm teaching is called Logic for Left-Wing Debaters and Activists. So it's what it sounds like. So if you're watching this, there's a decent chance that that's something that would interest you. So it's SSCC, so School Social and Cultural Change .teachable.com.
I love that you're doing that because I remember there were like some Occupy Wall Street teach-ins, and that was a class that I suggested that I should teach to people, and no one got back to me on it. So I'm glad you're the one doing that, though. Because this was honestly, you were an excellent debate partner, and I really thank you for that. It was a lot of fun, despite being kind of one of the weirder debates that I've done on the site. Now, there is something that I did want to mention, by the way, also, and I don't know if this is the fault or I guess the boon of your audience, but the actual I've made a habit of not reading the comments on the modern day debates because you never know what you're going to get there. But we had like overwhelmingly positive comments on that debate for the most part, and I think it may have been in part due to your people coming over. But also, maybe we won over some of the modern day debate audience, which is really great. Yeah. So there was one guy, however, who lost his mind about my claim that the CIA used art as a weapon and funded Jackson Pollock, and was like losing it in the comments the entire time. Guys, that is a fact. Just Google it, look it up. There's an
it's not a controversial thing that happened.
Yeah. And so, yes, the CIA did fund Jackson Pollock. No, that does not make Jackson Pollock a CIA employee. Oh. I'm sorry, I cut you off there. I just wanted to get that out.
Yeah, that's very strange. Yeah. I mean, it's the modern day debate chat. It's a mixed bag. It's not like, it's not like the chat on. I think he lost it anyway. But on Stefan Molyneux's YouTube channel, I went on there once to argue with him, and like the chat comments were all like, this man has a very Jewish appearance. It's not, it's not like that. But it's not. But but it attracts a mixed crowd. Like it's like you get some pretty weird stuff in there. Not weird on that level, but But anyway, I'm glad to see. I hope that people, my audience, are coming over and being a civilizing influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's the one thing that I liked. And also they had some pretty funny ones that they had. I used as the image for this. They said that I looked like the werewolf who owns the local pub.
I remember that. I caught that as it went by. I thought that was good.
Yeah. So anyway, this has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel. Special guest Ben Burgis. Thank you so much for debating together. We will catch you guys on the flip side.